now.
So, okay.
Recording now, all good.
All right, I think we can start. Let me do some introduction. A very good morning to everyone. Welcome to our first ECR seminar and workshop series. So today we are pleased to have Professor Neil to share with us a topic on how to engage industry for impactful research. So this session will be recorded. I will now pass the mic to Prof. Neil. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity again. And it's recorded so other ECRs can jump on. But there are some key takeaways that we want for the ECRs and industry engagement. This is one thing that is very, very difficult, and many PhD students are not taught this challenging type of research. So I'm going to quickly go over baby steps, where to start, where and how to start, engaging industry, exploratory approach, theory testing approach, and back to the start, right? Where do we start and how do we actually overcome our limitations? And we all know them, resources, time, and knowledge. Maybe we can overcome that third one, but the first two are always challenging, you know that. So I've spoken about this in the past. One motivating factor for me is that I wanted to engage industry because I want to be more effective teacher, and it comes out over time. Students notice a difference if you are industry engaged, and that is a huge thing that I want to impress upon ECRs. And that takes time. That's not something that you can change in one semester. And this is a multi-year approach to improving your teaching effectiveness. But we want to talk about how we get stuck into it. But the industry engagement, it is your brand, it's your promise. Of course, it's going to be related to your KPIs. But for your teaching, it's the authority that students see in you. I've given another ECR session on just developing your authority separately, but we're going to go on today and actually go into a bit more in the nuts and bolts of industry engagement. And some background, and many of you know that I decided back in 2004 to just get away from the survey type research and really get into understanding industry and getting engaged with industry, because I was sick and tired of how I looked in the classroom, and I wanted to be somewhere different in 10 years time. And I'll just give you an example. This is me back in 2004. Value to you in the program is that we try to bring visiting professors into the program, and you can discuss with the year 1 and year 2 that they have had the opportunity to meet. And I ask you, like I feel embarrassed to watch that. That's 2004. And for the students in the classroom, if we're doing that today, then you're dead as a teacher. And so that's something that, you know, this is my personal, let me just move on to the next slide. Just over 10 years later, I had this transformation, and the difference is in industry engagement.
This is why I'm interested. That's why I show you, what do? I go into factories, and I want to find out, how are these making bucket loads of money? Here's a car audio manufacturer. I cannot believe the dollars divided by 25. That's how much it's the cost of holding inventory. You'll see that in a minute. The one over here, this is a USB factory. How is that making money? It's getting the lowest quality chips available, and quality, no, this wasn't there.
And then let's bring this into the classroom in 2019. We love it. We miss our classrooms.
What is this? All right. So, you know, remember, you know about this, right? You know, you're right. Right. Don't worry about that. Okay. All right. It's, remember? All right. It's one of those. Okay. So what is this?
All right. So the big difference is how you can make an impression on the students. And that's my transformation. That didn't come from reading textbooks. That didn't come from just doing theoretical research. That came from many, many years of industry engagement that gives you the confidence and the energy to bring into the classroom, to bring to students. And that's, for some of you that are dead set, okay, I'm focused on research first and teaching second. fine, you know, different stages of your career, you've got different KPIs to meet. This is a side benefit that will happen over time from you engaging industry. We all think that McKinsey is, excuse me, is the only one out there that is the thought leader. I think that's balderdash, meaning that every one of us can be a thought leader. Every one of us can be coming out into the media and saying, here are the 5 big issues we need to understand in the plastics industry 2021 post-COVID. We shouldn't be waiting for McKinsey to doing this. McKinsey is full of people just like us. Once we get industry engaged, we can actually become more thought leaders. And this is something that I have a view for the future as well. Now, sorry, some of us think about, well, it's a dollars versus passion idea. That is, well, I need to get research grants. I need to get money for research. I need to get money to have a RA to help me engage industry, to help me reach out to industry. Fine, that's a challenge. And then on the other side, I say that your real challenge is your passion. Like, how passionate are you about the research topics you are doing? The academia, in some ways, we think, oh, they're very unforgiving when it comes to publishing your research. But I think the big problem is that they're not unforgiving when they listen to your presentations of research in conferences. And if you really know what your research is really like before you send it out to a journal, you would have a different view on how easy it is to avoid industry. When you are presenting to industry, they very, very quickly tell you that what you're saying is rubbish, because they don't have time for theoretical navel gazing. They want to know impact. They want to know, what is you doing? What is it that you're doing that helps me overcome my challenges, helps overcome me, put my company, my industry in a better place in 5 or 10 years' time, policy-wise, industry practice-wise, many different angles we can look at. Okay, how can you be resilient when you are in those audiences, in those networks, and getting feedback like that, which are very, very demanding? The only way you can do that is you need to be very, very passionate about that particular niche in the industry of engagement that you're involved in. And there's no other choice. If you're not passionate, then it's very hard to be resilient when you're facing industry. And I think academics do ourselves a disservice because we don't criticize each other enough before we send papers to publication. And in the end, 10% acceptance rates in a lot of the top journals, we find out in the long term, and in some ways that wastes time. In industry, they actually do it the other way. They criticize you first and actually save you from wasting time. And either way, you need to have that passion to overcome to be resilient, to overcome these short-term criticisms. Look at the issues 2021. The big thing that, we look at the literature. We tell PhD students, look at the literature, ECRs, look at the literature. Great, the literature is out of date. And it's always been out of date. So you need to look at the literature with a healthy skepticism and balance that with, say, 2021 issues like I'm showing here in the supply chain, in the customer market, in the motivation market, employee development, or in reporting, financial reporting. These are all issues that anyone could grab onto and bring to industry, but it's about focusing and being passionate on one of those issues. And later on, when I talk about theoretical approaches and industry engagement, I'll talk about the supply chain area that I'm most engaged with. But here's a summary of, if you leave this talk now, this is what you need to take away. Number one, it takes time to develop your proof of work. Many people ask me, but Neil, I want to engage industry, but how do I get access? How do I knock on the door and convince them to give me half an hour, 1 hour of interview time? Well, you need to develop proof of work. I'm going to show you how you develop your proof of work in that particular industry. Then you take that industry and you get their attention. That's what we're going to do. Number 2, develop connections. LinkedIn, industry associations, coffee time. LinkedIn is so powerful, but you need to be working on that 10, 15, 20 minutes every day. Is that an extra 20 minutes you need? No, you just spend 10, 15, 20 minutes less on your Facebook or Instagram or in other social media. Focus it more on LinkedIn. Then jab, jab, jab. Propose to give a talk. Industry association. Just this week, I gave a talk to Hong Kong Management Association, 30 plus DBA students on industry engagement. Speak to a university, speak to other universities. And that's how you do it. Jab, jab, jab. One day the right hook will come, because in another university you speak at, there might be a professor, their master's student turns out to be a CFO of a major multinational. And that's what happened to me back in 2010 when I was working with Professor Annie Wu in Taiwan. And her master's student was the CFO of HTC. And we got data, archival data from HTC that worked on, and we use that for research. Connections, connections, connections. Don't underestimate the power of industry engagement by you presenting at another university, because you're just expanding your network. And for me, it's about expanding your network of opportunity. And when you expand your network of opportunity, serendipity happens. Okay, so let me give you some examples of proof of work strategies. And that's the exploratory approach. And that's what we do when we go up. Some people ask me about, oh, did you get any payback from your, China Supplier 1000 study, where we interviewed 1,075 suppliers over 2.5 years from 2010, 2012? Yes, the payback was, it gave me access to industry. In some ways, this was the proof of work showing that how passionate I was, how passionate I am in the electronics industry, to really understand the issues going on in the electronic supply chain. Then when I go to industry, the doors open. Proof of work is so critical, but proof of work can turn into, this is the bottom-up approach, proof of work can turn into publications. We asked 2 questions out of the over 100 questions we're asking in that interview, over 10 pages, and each interview took 1 hour. We asked 2 questions. What is your #1 challenge? And how are you responding to that challenge? We asked that 1,075 times. And here we have the distribution. Can we publish that? Yes, we can. We published that in Industrial Marketing Management in 2018. And how did that come about? Well, that was very serendipity, but the fact that we had a large sample, and also the industry was crying out for understanding what were the challenges in that area. And we're so proud to actually get this graph here. This is basically a graph you'd talk to industry about, but we got this in that paper that was published in the A-Star Journal. So this, did we set out to do this when I first started those interviews? No, I was really industry focused in many, many ways. But over time, because we collected so much data, we go back to the literature, then we could find some papers to publish from that data. So let's give you an example of another idea. And there are different ways that we have actually massaged the data. Massaging meaning business analytics, creating infographics. So when we speak to industry, they immediately see the effort, the proof of work that I am bringing to the stage, that I'm bringing to the table. So if there's one thing that you need to take away from today's session, is that if you want to open doors, if you want to create opportunities, you need to start creating that proof of work. Proof of work doesn't necessarily come from focusing on theoretical top-down research. Proof of work comes from bottom-up, exploratory, focus group, interview-based research studies. Wow. And so give you another example of KPMG, where they approached me to work on an industry engagement project where we worked on a report of the future of manufacturing in China based on the China 2025 manufacturing plan, which is basically industry 4.0 for China. Many countries are at different stages of this plan. Anyway, so we go and interview all these industry people, and then I come up with this visualization, and then that visualization I can talk to industry. It may be not theoretical, but I use this to talk to industry. That's proof of work. I go to talk to all these consultants as part of this project. Then I put all those interviews into this visualization here. Again, analytics turning into infographics. And so that's more proof of work that gets me on the stage, gets me access to industry. And then finally, I talk to all these startups. Actually, honestly, so much more interesting, because when you talk to a startup, you're actually talking to find out their challenges, their responses, but you're trying to understand their passion, you're understanding their business model, and every startup is different. And amazingly, there's so much opportunities in researching entrepreneurship, startup space in Southeast Asia. Amazing. If anyone asked me today, where should I start? Maybe start in the entrepreneurial space. It is so interesting and so much easier to get access, especially if you are an ECR. This is an ECR session, so we want to make things accessible in the ideas that I give. So we can put that into an infographic again. And here are some interviews with startups from the KPMG project that I worked on. And then we have all the startups on the right-hand side, and then we tick the boxes of their big challenges that they are facing. Protecting intellectual property, selecting working with designers, monitoring factory work. Nunes presents startups' biggest challenge. Wow. So what can you do with this, Neil? You can do this. Wow, what is this? Well, Global Sources 2016, they asked me to go, Neil, can you go and interview 60 of our startups? So I went and interviewed 50 of their startups back in the Global Sources trade show. And each interview took about 15 or 20 minutes. And so we codified all of those interviews and then mapped out all of the challenges that these IoT crowdfunded startups are facing. And so now we're working on a research paper on this. But initially, that started off as an industry engagement assignment. Did I think I'd turn into a research project? No, not really. I was just so passionate about learning what is happening in the startup world. Wow. And so now I'm working with a professor in Europe on writing a paper on the challenges that faced by IoT startups. And we've got all the interviews, they're all documented because they're all videoed. So basically, we've got all the proper methods to support a case-based research here. This is, again, another example of bottom-up research. So if I put this on a PowerPoint slide on an industry stage, you're going to blow them away. But what I would do is say, I would pick out certain quadrants of this and put them on other PowerPoint slides, and then tell and say, here's the infographic, and here's the story that this is what it means for you, Mr. and Mrs. Startup. If you're going to do crowdfunding, you better be clear to get your upstream supply chain in order, as well as you are focusing on the final customer, which most of them focus on, but most startups tend to forget the upstream supply chain. And this is the boxes you need to tick. Industry needs to know that. And so did this come from theoretical research? No. Did this come from me reading hordes of literature on the entrepreneurial space? No. It just came from me going out and doing 50 interviews with startups using a very simple template. Tell us about your challenges that you're facing upstream, downstream, and how you're responding to them. And this is what we can do as a result of that. It's very easy to get started today, especially in the startup world. Okay, Cam, what about, okay, I don't like O'Connor. I don't like doing interviews. Okay, that's all right. There's the internet. What can we do with the internet? Well, you can address a current problem that is facing the world today. Well, what would that be? Pandemic, COVID-19, trade war. Well, here's a framework that of all the effects on supply chains and global supply chains, the internal industry drivers, there's external drivers, environmental drivers. So let's go to the internet and find out about this US-China trade war, and maybe not all companies are moving capacity out of China for the same reason. The media says, oh, they're moving out because of Trump's policy. They're moving out because of tariffs in USA. Oh, well, so simple. No, it's more complex than that. Companies do not move factory capacity for one reason alone. But Neil, you know, you're going to present this industry, but everyone has got a case study of someone moving out of China into Thailand. China, Rombo vacuum cleaners moved from China to Malaysia. GoPro moved from China to Mexico. Yeah, what are you going to bring to the table? What's new about what you are doing? Because you're going to the public data base of the internet like everyone else. Where is your competitive advantage? Well, my competitive advantage is, number one, I'm passionate about researching a particular topic. And when I'm passionate about it, I do 100% and 10% effort on that. And I'm sick and tired of people getting on the stage and talking about, oh, Rombo vacuum cleaners going to Malaysia, GoPro moving their factory to Mexico. Well, what about the hundreds of other startups or hundreds of other companies that have moved capacity out of China? I want to know, what is the big picture? No one does that. Everyone is not passionate enough. They're lazy. And they always just talk about one case study here, one case study there, enough to say, well, I'm an expert of moving factory capacity from one country to another. No, you've got to go to the nth degree. Again, my big message, you need to be passionate about your topic. Now, Neil, you just talk last 5 minutes. How about you show me something? Okay, there you go. All right, 102 companies around the world have moved factory capacity out of China. Neil, how did you do this? This would have taken years to get. No, I worked with an RA and we did this in 2 months. We scaled the internet, and this is everything that's publicly available. And notice here, I've had to put the whole, you know, there is one column for every company, and I've had to put it onto 2 rows because there's 102 of them. And then on the side, we document the reasons for moving out of China. We did this in 2 months with an RA. You tell me that we cannot do proof of work to get access to talk to industry. Like once I show that, then I can open doors in talking to industry executives because they want to know, what are the strategies? When should I move capacity from China? I know all my competitors are. What boxes should I be ticking before I make that decision? Wow, O'Connor, suddenly you're an expert in industry engagement. No, not really. I've just done the proof of work to open the door to an opportunity. That's all. This is not final yet, but this is my proof of work to show that, well, you know, I'm really passionate about having an engagement with you, Mr. CEO, Mrs. CEO, or whatever. That's what we mean by bottom up. Bottom up, you approach it first by creating proof of work. Then that can open doors, and then other things may happen. Serendipity, like what happened with the IoT. We're developing a paper, like what happened with the China Supplier 1000. It turned into a publishable research paper. So that's what we mean by bottom up. You can do it through interviews, you can do it through internet. And so, you know, there's some more graphics that I'd show industry. I wouldn't show industry this directly, but I would show more infographics like this: industries represented, location of company headquarters. Like, just an interesting soundbite here that 33 companies out of the 102 moved factory capacity out of China to Vietnam. Oh, we all know that. We all know that Vietnam is the most popular, blah, blah, blah. But did you know that out of those 33, only one moved 100% of its factory capacity from China to Vietnam? Oh, what does that mean? Well, those that were moving 100% of their factory capacity were going to Taiwan. They were going to Thailand. They were going to Mexico. Wow, we didn't know this. Wow. And And so therefore the strategy of moving to Vietnam is a China +1 strategy, whereas the strategy of moving to Mexico, Thailand, Taiwan is more a China replacement strategy. Suddenly this is strategic management. This is strategic global supply chain management. Wow, Neil, how'd you learn that? By going to the internet. Did you interview anyone? No. Well, proof of work. Stories come out when you start to get lots and lots of data, not just one case study. Wow. And so there you have some more proof of work here. So we could go to top down, finish up my last part of what we're talking about today. Let me remind you again, you need time, you need to develop connections, and you need to keep on knocking on doors, jab, jab, jab. Now, the big thing that helps you in all of these, especially developing connections, jab, 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 is developing your proof of work. All right. And then what can come out of that? Well, this last section I'll talk about, and that is where you get access to private data, like the performance evaluation data I got from a CFO friend of mine in a listed company in China over 15 years ago. 2002, we published it in Abacus 13 years later in 2015. Balanced scorecard data, like I said earlier, we got from HTC, and we're working on that as we speak. Complaints data, we've just created a paper and submitted it to a major journal. They were over 3,000 complaints of suppliers made by buyers all around the world. Audit data. Now, how did this come about? It came through relationships. I told you about the one with Professor Wu. Her master's student was CFO of HTC. The complaints data came from Mike Bellamy, who I shared a stage with at Global Sources, speaking to buyers about how they can improve their management of their suppliers and relationships with their suppliers. How did I get to there? Because I did the China Supplier 1000 study. Global Sources saw that I had the proof of work to bring to the stage and talk to buyers. Then I met Mike Bellamy, and then data came out of that. Then audit data, I met the founder. This is another guy, Renald Ogeron from Southeast Asia. I met him in 2015 on the stage in Global Sources, and I've just got access to their data, 12,500 product audits. Wow. It's going to take years to farm and write research papers on, but we will speed that up. What I'm saying is that data comes from relationships. Relationships come from your proof of work. See the connection, proof of work, that shows your passion. People will listen to you, then the relationships, then data. Okay. And maybe the idea of the strategy with HTC and Annie Wu is actually finding, if you want to get a connection with a CEO that's just done a master's, find out the university they did the master's at, and then go and find out who was their major teacher, and then go and do a research project with that teacher with the view to working with that master's student and access to the data that the master's student can give you too. Wow. These are real practical strategies I want you to take away from this ECR session. I'm not here to glorify myself. I want people going out and doing these strategies and just trying something different and not stop beating your head against the wall when industry says no to your proposals or when industry says no to meeting up. Okay. So again, there's the issues, and I'm going to finish with just talking about some of the areas, theoretical top-down, sustainability, compliance, and transparency in the supply chain, but working with archival data. Wow. So, on the transparency, this is a 2021 issue. Excuse me, finish up in 5 minutes if you like. Transparency is a very big area in 2021 because companies cannot visit their supply chain. And sustainability, well, it's growing and growing, and it's not going to go away. But people think sustainability is, let's just reduce pollution, reduce waste. But really, the engine of sustainability is non-optimized operations in factories around the world. And so I'm doing research on that. And then finally, compliance, which I haven't got a chance to work with, but that's something that is dear to my heart as well. So transparency, Pivot 88, they're a startup. In 2009, they started with 10 factories. They put tablets in the factories, and the people in the factories, they update factory processes by keying in data into the tablets at different times during the day, so their customer on the other side of the world can actually see the progress of different lines of product orders, and they can stop and start at any time. And so now that's gone to 12,500 factories. Wow, we thought that only happened in 2020 when companies couldn't visit factories. No, this has been growing and growing and growing trend in supply chain management, where we are managing suppliers from a distance. And Pivot 88 is a great example of that, bringing transparency to the hundreds, thousands of multinationals around the world. So there's the Blacklist data that I talked about with Mike Bellamy, and we've got that into a paper. And why I say there's theoretical top down, like bottom up, it was a bottom up opportunity because I came from my relationship with Mike Bellamy because of China Supplier 1000, but now we turn it into a top down research project, because now we look at all these problems encountered, and then we group the unethical scams into the, well, you know, myopic scams. That is poor quality, missed delivery, something went wrong, but they really, the supplier did not set out from the outset to scam you. And so we look at how can we predict whether a buyer can avoid that really bad, unethical scam. And then what we find is that we can predict that with, if they have a verified business, if they visit the factory, third-party quality check, and then they have contracts. Now, again, this is top down, and this came from archival data like the supplier blacklist, but we've turned it into and this is your theoretical testing of screening mechanisms, audit mechanisms, resolution mechanisms, with the dependent variable, the objective function being the probability that the supplier you're working with has set out unethically to scam you. That is, to take your money and send you a box of rocks. Another example is learning when we go to supply chain sustainability. Now, again, proof of work is when I go into the factories, because in 2015, 16, 17, 18, I've been visiting factories. Now, do these factories lead to research? Not directly. Like, these were factories that a buyer paid me to audit back in 2016. Did I know how to audit? No, but I learned very, very fast, because you have a checklist. And I was so fascinated about going into factories, and I've been doing that for several years already. And so it's just a matter of going through all the checklists and checking everything, and then providing the full audit report to the client in the USA. Now, as a result of this, how does this help me in my research? Well, again, this is my proof of work, because when I talk to industry, I can actually show differences and challenges that factories are having, so I can get buyers to better understand the challenges that suppliers are facing, because buyers are always beating up on their suppliers. I can tell you, especially the suppliers in the developing world, not just China, like all throughout Southeast Asia, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and so forth. Okay, so where does this lead? And what's this got to do with sustainability? Well, not until you go into the factory that you see poor practices that waste resources. And so does that lead to some project? Maybe it can. How can it lead? Well, here's a project. Theoretically, we can think of how factories learn over time, and factories are subject to audits all the time. What does that mean? Well, it's not just one company audits a factory and then the factory is like, they've had the vaccine and so they no longer need to be audited. No, just every other month, an auditor will come in for a buyer or to just double check that the factory is worthy of producing the product for the buyer. Wow. Yes, are factories over audited? Yes, in some ways. especially if they're audited every month. They don't really change from month to month, but from year to year, they can change. So is there some theoretical thing we can look at? Yes, we can look at how do factories learn. And so here's an example. We would start off with a framework. Dependent variable is a more recent product audit AQL outcome. What is that? Acceptable quality limit. And what are the inputs into that? It could be the starting base of the factory audit outcome, other controlling factors, or a previous product audit. Well, and then you can look at it longitudinally. So where do you get data from that? You get it from factory audits, which I've got from my friend that I met on the Global Sources stage back in 2015. I've got access to 500 factory audits, and now we are matching them with, and that's what we see when we actually look at the factory audits. They're not all the same. There's higher quality in Guangdong, Shanghai, Jiangxi, and there are lower quality factory audit outcomes in Shaanxi, Hubei, and Guangxi. Wow, industry like to know this, but I'm taking this further. Remember, we're in the theoretical testing for publication stage. This is something I can use in getting my foot in the door and talking to industry, of course. So, we're doing two things here. Now, moving this to the publication stage, we want to combine that with product audits. Remember the framework. That the framework is, I've just shown you the starting base of the factory audit outcome on your far left, but now we want to get the dependent variable, that is the product audit AQL outcome. Does a good factory audit lead to a better product audit outcome? AQL is acceptable quality limit, and across countries in the developed world, the average developing world, the average acceptable quality limit is about 50%. You've got to be kidding me. This is a real sustainability issue where factories are throwing away 50% of what they produce. Yes, in a lot of industry, this happens. Wow, I don't know about this. Well, the media doesn't talk about the real causes of sustainability problems. And this is what you find out when you go on the ground into factories. Product audits, 12,500 of them. And so we're going to merge them two together. There's some examples across different countries of inspection reports that did not meet AQL limit, 30%, 40%, down to 20%, and in some places 16%. Like some factories need a lot of help. And this is the project that we're currently working on, where we're looking at, do prior factory audits lead to better product audit outcomes? Because most buyers do not order a factory audit. They just order a product audit and just hope that the container that arrives in their country turns out to be good quality. And this is a theoretical top-down based on access to archival data. 12,500 product audits, got 500 factory audits. We're merging together. It's going to take a while to work on this project. So that's just finishing up, and the compliance we can talk in another day, but that's a big issue because the USA and Europe are very, very big on compliance now. And they're really holding the importer of record, that are buyers of goods out of factories in the developing world, to the flame. They're holding their feet to the flame on various compliance issues. And if there's a product defect, then the buyer has to recall every unit of that product in their country, in Europe or USA. And so that is going to feed back into more pressure on factories. And actually, I'm working with product IP to get details of the extent to which buyers have fulfilled their compliance requirements in the EU, which is a big issue at the moment. And there's a framework there for top down that we're working on. And then maybe for some of you like doing surveys, then you could go in and talk about what happened in 2020 when the factories were ramping up production of face masks. And by the way, most of them weren't up to quality, and more than half of face masks produced today are really not up to quality anyway, but people won't tell you that. But from a research angle, you can go into the factory and actually study the challenges that factories have in changing from one product that they've made for 5, 10, 15 years into another product like face masks that they've never made before, and the challenges that they have faced operationally, but also compliance-wise, because China has cracked down on factories that were making poor quality masks in 2020. It's happened in other countries, but there's much more pressure coming from EU and US on that. So how do factories respond to these greater compliance pressures that are coming through buyers from overseas? So there you have it. The big thing I want you to take away is, number one, research takes time. If you're going to engage industry, and that's what we're about today, then you need to, don't focus on publication. You've got to focus on proof of work and having that passion for understanding the real issues in that particular industry segment. When you actually establish that proof of work, that opens doors into that industry, and then that can lead to data opportunity and then research publications down the road. This all takes time, and to have resilience, to do that over time, you need to have passion, you need to be excited about the topic that you're working on. So that finishes what I want to talk about. Happy to take questions, and thank you for joining today's session.
Thank you very much, Prof. Neil. Is there any questions from the floor?
Oops.
Hi Neil. I have a question.
Yes.
I think one of the biggest challenges is making the initial contact. There's always this perception that the industry knows more than the academics, and we are more of a textbook people. We don't really know what's happening in reality, and we don't really know what's happening in the industry. So how do you break that mindset?
The mindset, or the mindset of industry?
Oh, yep.
Yeah. Well, the only way I've learned how to break it is to invest, in parallel to your research, invest in proof of work efforts. That is, you get an RA to do some research on a particular industry. Say, for example, plastics industry. I know Shantha is, got connections there, and you can use those connections, but maybe it's a new industry like plastics industry. Then you get an RA from first year, second year, third year to do online research to actually find out what is the scope of that industry, and how many people work in it, how many people are employed, what are the challenges being faced by it, as you can read online, and at least establish some minimal base of understanding of that industry. And then maybe the next stage is to think about, is there some way that we can get data off the internet, like what I did with the trade war example, that can show my prowess in business analytics in creating an infographic, and then suddenly the next stage I can go to, then you can start to knock on door to get their interests. Now, knocking on doors to me might be meaning that you reach out to the Plastics Association to give a half-hour, 45-minute webinar to their members on the challenges faced by the industry and ways in which it can go forward, and focusing on practical takeaways rather than theoretical. How would you know that? Well, at least you need to invest in your internet research. Maybe you need to invest in data gathering, like what I did with that trade war example.
Thank you for that.
But Logan, I'm happy I want you to challenge me on this, because I guess the way I talk, it sounds too easy. I'm not saying it's easy. Okay. I have to admit that I'm just crazy. If I set my mind on something, I just do more than the minimum. I don't see that China Supplier 1000 study that cost me $50,000 US to do. I didn't wait for a research grant to do that. Okay. A lot of the RAs that I hire now, I just use my own money. I don't wait for research grants. Sometimes you got to do things fast. you know, 1 month, I've got to collect things because I want to talk to an industry association month 2, month 3, bang, 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 bang. All right. It's a multiple. So I know I'm not asking ECRs to do this. I'm just showing you that I'm a bit crazy. So some of my ideas is really thinking out of the box, but that's what we want. It's 2021 now. We can't do things like we've done the last 10 years. That's my view anyway.
Yep.
So do please, Logan, please challenge me. So, Neil, you know, I'm happy to say, Neil, it sounds easy in theory, but you know, going into getting data and then reaching out to an association, it's not that easy. Maybe you can do it in Hong Kong, but you can't do it in Malaysia or something like that. I'm okay. If it is tough, then I'm happy to have that conversation. And then we can think about how to do it even better. Like I've employed an RA to gather data for me on the top 5 industries in Malaysia, because I just want to be more aware of what's going on in Malaysia.
Yeah.
And not just China.
And I think one of the most common thing is about knowing people. I think Malaysia, we still have this mindset of not about knowing what, is about knowing who. And another thing I wanted to ask is,
Logan, yeah, just
sure.
Just to help with that, and
Yep.
that totally throughout Asia, Malaysia, pretty sure.
Yep.
That's where you got reach out to your network in other universities that may have key master's students that are in industry.
Yeah.
You with me? So,
yeah.
And then the key people, the key informants in industry, if they're doing a master's, they're doing a DBA, maybe they're in Singapore, maybe they're in another Southeast Asian country, but they're enrolled in a master's, then you go and set up a research project with the director of that master's program or the someone that is a supervisor of that key informant.
Yeah.
So that's another one. I'm just seeing a practical takeaways here today. Not so Logan. Sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. And when you were mentioning about the baby steps you were making in the supply chain industry, did you feel that there were any specific industry which was slightly more approachable, or the type of companies, whether they were SMEs or public companies or listed companies? Did you find any of a specific signal where you felt it was more approachable or less approachable?
Okay, right now, if you to hold you want an answer right now, I would say I would work on startups immediately, just much more approachable.
Yeah.
They're busy, but busy people are approachable. Busy people are, in some ways, they're like ECRs. The startup entrepreneurs, they're like ECRs because they see the future, the world, and anything is possible. And developing relationships so critical for them. So they'll appreciate the fact that you're reaching out to them because they've had to knock on many, many doors in their entrepreneurship journey. So that's one area. The other area, I chose electronics because I was in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, where all the trade shows are happening. Most of those trade shows are electronics. And by the way, my first approach to going to, I'd go to trade shows too, Logan. Trade shows. There's trade shows in Malaysia, maybe not electronics, but in other areas. Go to trade shows, hand out your business cards. That's what I first did, 2009, end of 2009, end of 2010. My whole idea of the 1000 study was not the 1000 study. I went to this trade show October 2010 and maybe in September to hand out business cards with the idea that, oh, I'll follow up after I collected business cards weeks after for interview and survey. But then I realized, oh, everyone in the trade show, half the time they're just sitting around playing with their smartphone. Wow, I could be interviewing them while they're sitting around. And it just, wow, ding, the light went off in my head. And so the very next month, October, went to the trade shows in Global Sources with a team of interviewers, and we ended up interviewing 25 or 35 of these companies within 2 or 3 days. And I'm thinking, wow, this, then I went to another trade show. I had 150 interviews done by January and February 2011. I decided, Neil, please, you've got a good process going on now. Don't let this be like any other professional project. That is, you've done 150 interviews, you've done your paper, publish it and move on to something else. Now's your chance to make a mark and your legacy. And then I thought, okay, I decided that February 2011, I'm going to do 1,000 because I knew the process to follow. And that's what I did. But getting back to you, how do you know is there one industry that's easier to approach than others? I'd work with trade shows and I would work with startups. And then you'd be very specific in that industry too.
I got a couple of questions.
Imtiaz, you can go first.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, I guess you kind of answered your part of my question regarding when you claim that, you know, you're being crazy about this thing, you got crazy passion for this. So I guess what I want to know is, what is the method behind that madness? Do you set aside maybe 5 hours every week, or and approach like cold calling as many contacts as possible, and then let the law of large numbers do its trick?
Well, maybe that might be a more psychological question. You're asking me what's my mindset, Imtiaz, right?
Yeah, I mean, how do you approach? There's an element of randomness involved, so
yeah.
some resilience.
First of all, I have my own ego, and I love to be on the stage, so the ego feeds. But more importantly, to get on the stage, I don't want to be like everyone else. I want to be different from others. Okay, so how the randomness come about? That is, it is random, like, but yeah, because, okay. Number one, I attend more industry conferences than I do academic conferences. Mm-hmm. And so I get to hear a lot of the challenges and issues in industry. And then I listened to this guy from BCI Global Consulting Company, presented to this supply chain conference last November. I was presenting in the same conference and he was presenting, and this is all online, so you just do a 22-minute presentation on video. And he was presenting because they advise companies around the world about how to move capacity from one country to another. And he was just talking about this moving out of China to Vietnam. And I thought, okay, yeah, I could talk about that, but then I would just be like him. I want to be different from him. I want to get on the stage and say, well, okay, you've heard a lot of little one case study stories. Someone moved here, someone moved there, but here's the big picture, and here's 102, and this is what we learned. Here are the patterns. So I want to bring something new to the stage. But that was that ignited that. Listening to that industry presentation in November ignited my idea. Okay, I hire an RA for 2 months. Maybe it costs me 2,000 more ringgit. Okay, because I just want to get the full picture. And now I've got the full picture, and now I can go on the stage, and I'm going to present in May to the similar industry conference. About, okay, here's the big picture, and it's the public picture because it's an iceberg. There's so much private factory moves that we don't know about, and then I'll go from there. But Imtiaz, your question is, what is the spark that leads to one thing or another? For now, the sparks are coming out of industry, not out of reading academic papers.
Neil, we have one more question in the chat.
Okay.
It's from Berto, and he asks, how do you ensure big companies to have the confidence to work with researchers from the university? Because from his experience, several top companies prefer to do work with a private consultant.
Well, there's a different thing. Number one, working with consultants, then they're working with another company. Sorry, excuse me. Let me just. They're working with another company. So, and number two, that company has a brand. So they're working with a brand. A lot of companies do not like to work directly in a consulting way with individuals. And I noticed that, like, before I closed my company, Ricebox Limited in Hong Kong, it was so easier to get access and do audit engagement with clients around the world because they're working with a company. So number one, they like to work with other companies. How do you get work with you? You've got to approach the industry. You cannot approach them with the idea of, give me your data. You've got to approach them with the idea of how you can help that industry. And for you to get to that stage, you need to create some of your own proof of work. All right. So there are multiple steps. And I think a lot of researchers are thinking that, industry data, that's base one, like, baseball, you're on the batting pitch, right? Base one, get the data from industry. No, that's base three. Base one is finding your passion, finding your real interest, or that real question that's not being answered by industry, in the media and things like that. We were talking about a trade war, but no one's talking about, well, what are the real reasons for factories moving out of China? That's base one, all right? And then base two is then going to the next level, creating that proof of work. Then base three, then approaching industry. Look, this is what I find and what we want to do. Can we go into a little bit more detail of the real challenges of you moving factories into Malaysia or out of Malaysia and things like that?
Thanks for that, Neil. Maybe I ask the final question. I'm just wondering, for ECR, right? Is it better for us to work alongside like-minded ECR and approach the industry together? Or do you think it's better for us to kind of find our passion, find our niche, and just go with the flow? Which do you think will be a better approach?
I think passion and going with the flow is really, really critical. Getting to base one, you're working on your own funds, you're working on your own fashion. It's your own passion. You're into base one and then base two. I'll give you an example. There are two DBA students I was talking to for the Hong Kong Management Association during the week. One was interested in entrepreneurship. The other was interested in IoT. And I said to both of them, like, because they said in the chat room, I just asked, where you're working and all that. I said, why don't you team up together? You're both definitely in the entrepreneurial area, and go and interview 50 IoT startups. And then your entrepreneurial person, you take the entrepreneurial angle. The IoT person, you take the IoT angle. You can do two DBAs out of that one project. So how would that work? Because you both got that common interest. But I think practically, Sharon, that common interest really has to be at the proof of work stage. It cannot be, we have a common interest in that, we both need to publish an A-star journal publication. No, that will not work. Why? Because that's a goal 2, 3, 4 years in the future. You've got to have something where, let's go to the Rock Cafe for lunch every third day, every Wednesday, every Friday, and let's just talk about the things that are going on in this industry. If you really don't have that passion of having lunch with someone, I don't know how you're going to be excited to work with that someone when you get down to the writing and publication stage. That's my own view.
Thank you for that, Neil. Nothing else from me. You just mentioned that Rock Cafe should sponsor some of your talk.
Thank you.
So is there any other question? So if there's no more questions.
I'm happy to share the PowerPoint slides too, Sharon. So
yeah.
Can we get the recording too?
You can send to me. I will share it in the intranet.
I will.
Thank you. So if there's no more questions, yeah, I think we shall end here. Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much.
I think it's important for Sharon, because this is an ECR session, for the ECRs to give feedback to Sharon on, you know, what is your big takeaway. It's very important that we get feedback on these, because we want to know whether, are we hitting the mark? Are we just, you know, is this time well invested for the ECRs? So do provide feedback, and that's important for Sharon in organising this. And thanks again, Sharon, for helping to organise.
Thanks, Prof. Thanks everyone for attending the session.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.